Hey all, welcome back. It's me, Kevin. Did you know that interviews actually work both ways? When you attend an interview, not only are you getting interviewed, but it is also a chance for you to be interviewing your potential employer. And it is important to be thinking like that because you do not want to look desperate for the job, am I right? Because if you do, then you will be answering questions that you shouldn't be answering and then potentially getting into a job from hell. And I'm pretty sure you do not want that. So today I'd like to share with you some red flags in any job interview that secretly shows signs of a bad employer. And if you do see these signs, please do not take up the job. Unless, of course, you want to make yourself feel miserable. First, let's start with some common questions that are illegal to ask by the interviewer. The first question is religion. Now, any interviewer are not supposed to ask you what your religion is or what your culture is because well, what has my religion or culture got to do with this job? The second illegal question is asking about whether you are planning to start a family. Now, this is more likely catered to the female audience because, when they ask these questions, what they're trying to gauge is if you're a female and you want to start a family, then they're going to start thinking about maternity leave, and that's illegal. Because, if I do plan to start a family in the future, then that's my personal problem. That has got nothing to do with the job I'm applying for. The third question that most people tend to answer but they shouldn't have is when they ask you what was your last pay. Now this type of question is very subtle. They would definitely try to slide it in, catch you off guard and hoping that you will answer them. And 90% of the time, applicants will answer that question because they don't know that it is a question that they do not need to answer. And we all know why they are asking this question, am I right? I mean, it is pretty obvious. They just want to know what your current pay is so that they do not give you too big of an increment. You see, these type of questions are actually not appropriate, meaning it has got nothing to do with the job you're applying for. What they should be focusing more on is the values that you are going to bring to the company. So their questions should be revolving around your past experience, the projects you did in the past, and what can you bring to the company. Because after all, you're being interviewed for the job, not being interviewed as a human being. The next sign is inaccurate job description. So I guess we all have been there. This job posting that you see being advertised, it has all sorts of requirements, all sorts of skill sets that you need to meet before applying. And when you found that job, you applied for it, you get that interview, you go for the interview, and then you realize the things that they talk about has got nothing to do with the job. And I'm not talking about them being completely off the job description. They do still have those elements in there, but they tend to reduce it, meaning they were not expecting you to have as much responsibility as what they say. So sometimes they will say things like, in your job description, you're only expected to perform 20% of those requirements, and the remaining 80% will come in maybe 6 months later. And you need to be really careful when they say this because chances are after 6 months, you're just going to remain where you are and they're not going to do what they said. And the same goes for jobs that are expecting way too much from you and is being unreasonable. And sometimes the interviewer even hints you that you need to do a little bit of free work, which leads me to my next point. The next sign of a bad employer is they expect you to do free work. It goes to say that for any jobs you apply for, the interviewer, your manager, your potential employer, they kind of expect you to go above and beyond your job description. And that's perfectly fine because I believe that in any job, you should always try to outperform. But you also need to be extremely careful with this, especially when you are not getting paid for it. And unfortunately, this is one of those things that are really hard to spot during an interview, and you will most likely see it when you got the job. But one thing I found that is necessary to ask is, if you're working a 9-to-5 job, then always be asking whether you're expected to work during the weekends, and if you are working during the weekends, what type of compensation is there? And this is actually a true story. I did not ask my interviewer about working on weekends, working after hours, because I expected them to be compensating me, whether it is in terms of pay or maybe give me some time off. And because I did not ask that question, I ended up doing all this after hours for free. So make sure you ask as many questions as you can during an interview and get as much clarification as possible until you're happy with their answer. Now, sometimes we are okay to work after hours without any sort of compensations because, sometimes we want to make ourselves look good. But if you do decide to do that, make sure that you clear the next red flag. The next red flag is your pay is not matching up with your job description. Now, if you're going to work on the weekends or after hours without any sort of compensation, then make sure that it is justified in your pay. I know this sounds a little bit crazy, but sometimes there are just so many unrealistic expectations from the company. For example, I am in the IT field, right? So I know a lot about the IT job market. And the one thing I always see is people do love to hire CTOs, and this is very common in smaller companies, especially startups. But as I read this job description, this CTO that they are hiring, he does everything from tech support to hardware to fixing computers to answering questions to emails to servers, basically every single thing. And this is very common, especially if the company is a non-tech company. And if you're in the IT industry, then you would know that that's just not possible. A CTO can't have so much responsibility. But if the company insists on that, then the company better be prepared to pay a large amount of money for this CTO. And this is what I see most bad employers do. They try their best to not pay you the market rate. And if you do not do your own homework, if you do not do your own research, then you're probably going to get below the market rate. Employers who do not want to pay you the market rates is what I call them a low quality employers, where they try to pay you a low pay for work that is above your level. There is definitely good and bad in this. I mean, if the company is small and is still growing, then they can't afford to pay you the market rate. But if you grow together with the company, then you may be rewarded later on in the future. So this is something that you need to take into account, and you need to make this judgment yourself. If you want to get an estimate on your salary, then I suggest you try out Glassdoor. I'll leave the link in the description below. Okay, the next red flag is having a high turnover rate. So sometimes when a company has a really toxic environment, people tend to come and go at a really quick rate, which is why during an interview, you need to ask all the right questions, such as why is this position open, and do they have a valid, good reason for it? Of course, there are things that you wouldn't be able to find out, like if the company is firing people or making people redundant, or are people leaving voluntarily. Again, if you want to find out more about how companies treat their employees, then read up some reviews in Glassdoor. The final red flag to me is a really funny one, and that is having a really high response rate to the job application. I know this sounds weird, like there's a lot of demand for the job, so why would that look bad for the employer? But hear me out for a second. It actually looks really bad for the employer if they were to respond to every single applicant out there, because that would mean that they have to interview that many applicants in a really short amount of time. So what's going to happen is, instead of interviewing one-on-one, they might have a group interview, which to me is the worst type of interviews ever, because that just shows that this employer, they don't know what they want, and so they want everything. And this to me shows that they are indecisive. And if an employer is really bad at decision making, then it is not someone that I'm willing to work with. So let me tell you a true story that happens to me in regards to this red flag. Many years ago, I was in this job interview where 3 applicants were being interviewed at the same time. Now, that wasn't a problem to me, but the thing is, they didn't tell us it was a group interview, so everyone was kind of expecting a one-on-one interview. And this company is a really small-sized company, judging from the look and feel of their office. But the most ridiculous thing here is that during the interview, the interviewer was asking these questions that were meant for people with 200 IQ. And that's not even the worst part, because when he revealed what the pay was, it was way below the market rate. So he wanted a genius, but for a really, really cheap price. And that itself is not a good sign, especially if the company is fairly small, because small companies can't afford to be choosy. So I hope these red flags can help you out in understanding your potential employer. One bonus tip I can offer you is that During the interview, if you feel like something is not right, then just reject that offer. Because our instincts are pretty sharp. If you feel that something smells fishy or something just doesn't sound right or the interviewer is trying to hide something, then chances are they are hiding something. Anyways, that's it for me in this video. Do leave me a comments down below and let me know what sort of bad experiences have you had during interviews that made you say no. Please do share it with us because we would love to hear it. And if you haven't done so, please do like this video and subscribe to my channel. That would be much appreciated. Alright, this is the end of the video. Take care and I'll see you soon.